We get questions a lot of times in our office about alimony, and we don't really have alimony in Texas per se. We have what we call post-divorce spousal maintenance, and that is meant to be rehabilitative in nature, and it's meant for a spouse that is unable to meet their minimum reasonable needs. So we get a lot of people, or I do anyway, that come in with preconceived notions, I think, that they've gotten from other states or from friends who've told them about their divorce. And it's really a case-by-case basis, and minimum reasonable needs is probably somewhere in the range of $35,000 to $40,000 a year. Maybe more than that, depending on children and where exactly you're living. There's nothing black and white that I know of in the code, but it's, can you afford to get around town, whether that's by a bus or car? Can you put a roof over your head and eat? It's
It's
minimum.
not current lifestyle.
Absolutely not
Which is
current
what people
lifestyle.
think. Mm-hmm.
And even when they do award it, like I said, it's supposed to be rehabilitative. And so if you're going to a judge and asking them to award you post-divorce spousal maintenance, you generally have the burden of proving, I've gone out there, I've applied for jobs, I'm unable to get them, this is the amount I'm able to make, and it's not enough to meet my budget. So it is by no means an entitlement. In some states it is, but not in Texas. So rehabilitative, you're going to have to be able to show, okay, well, if I get this alimony, I'm going to go back and get retraining as a dental hygienist. It will take me this long, it will cost this much, and then I should be able to make an amount where I can pay my rent, mortgage, whatever, and get by.
And the judge is limited to ordering it the minimum amount of time that it will take the spouse to become self-supporting post-divorce. So if your training program or your education will take you 1 year, the judge is limited by our family code to only order it for 1 year. It's very, very limited in Texas. What we see a lot more commonly is people agreeing to what we call contractual alimony. And we see this all the time, where one spouse, for example, has stayed home and taken care of the kids, or has made sacrifices in their career for the benefit of the other spouse's career, and the spouse who makes more money is willing to pay a certain amount of contractual alimony to help the other spouse get on their feet post-divorce. And that isn't limited by the family code. That can be any terms you agree to. So that's really much more common in Texas.
Well, and it's a contract. A court cannot modify that. They can't modify the contract between you. Whereas if it's court-ordered post-divorce maintenance, it is modifiable by the court. I haven't seen a lot of that. I don't know if you guys have.
Well, and I rarely have had a judge order post-divorce maintenance. I have frequently had judges order temporary spousal support. And sometimes that temporary spousal support is maybe they have separated and one person's in the house, and it's pay the mortgage. And the mortgage is kind of the temporary spousal support during the pendency of the divorce. But rarely in a final trial do I have a court order spousal maintenance. Of course, I think a lot of those cases I handle, we end up settling. And so we're not getting to the courthouse at the time of the final trial to have a judge determine it. And so we do a lot of cases where people do agree to pay some alimony. It's a tax benefit to the person paying, and it's taxable income to the person receiving it, which is different than child support. And we'll also look at the estate, of course. The size of the estate, is there liquid in the estate? Maybe instead of alimony, there's investment accounts or something that they can use to live off of for a while while they're figuring out what to do.
And when we say estate, we mean the community assets, all the assets that the community has accumulated during the marriage. And if you're talking about what a court would do, the court is required to consider the property division that the spouse who's requesting maintenance would get in the divorce. So, for example, if the spouse had no income, but she were going to receive a $2 million portion of the community estate, the court would be much less likely to award her maintenance because she has assets sufficient to meet her minimum reasonable needs.
Right. And I think too, it's not written in stone anywhere, but the judges are tend to be more inclined to do a disproportionate split of the community estate before awarding spousal maintenance. I don't know if that
I think that's accurate too.
and that's probably more based historically on what we've seen in Texas too. Being a community property estate, a community property state, I think the courts were inclined to look at what resources the couple have built together and divide that, and instead of having alimony. That's why we never had alimony from the beginning.
Right, and we've only had alimony, or we're calling it alimony, but it's spousal maintenance. We've only had spousal maintenance fewer than 20 years in Texas.
Right.
It's a relatively new concept in Texas.
And the family code just changed on the length of time and the amount that you can get, depending on how long you've been married. But it's still very difficult to get it ordered by a judge.
And those amounts are maximums. They're the most of the court. It's just tying the hands of the judge with how much they can order. You still have to qualify, prove your minimum reasonable needs, prove the length of time till you will become self-supporting.
There are exceptions for domestic violence and for disabilities.
Right.
Again, we don't see a lot of those, but the time frames are 10 years, 20 years, and 30 or more, with the maximum at 30 or more being $5,000 a month or 20% of net income for up to 10 years.
And 30 years of marriage, you're saying?
At 30 years or more of marriage. But I personally, I don't know of a case where that's been awarded by a judge. I'm sure maybe there is one somewhere in the state, but I think that is probably meant for those cases where one spouse has primarily been the homemaker, has stayed home, does not have job skills, and you're probably looking at someone that's more advanced in age that would be eligible for something like that.
I think the gist of it is Texas doesn't really do a good job of taking care of stay-at-home parents, whether it's the male or the female, post-divorce. We don't have a good system for if somebody has been home for 12 years and out of the workforce, you don't just go and put a job application in and get, start a career like that. So that's important to think about if you're thinking about divorce, is how are you going to support yourself after this?
Right, and in Texas, Texas is a no-fault divorce state, which means that you can get a divorce for any reason you want in Texas. Your spouse cannot prevent you from getting a divorce in Texas. They can delay it, they can make it more difficult, they can make it more expensive, they can make it more unpleasant, but they can't prevent you from getting a divorce. So when you get married and if you choose to stay at home with children, if either spouse decides to get divorced, there's nothing you can do to prevent it.
And I think I misspoke earlier. When you are applying the statute for the purposes of post-divorce spousal maintenance, the cap is 20% of the person's gross income, not net. It's actually net for child support, gross for spousal maintenance, just to be clear.
Right. And if you're the income earning spouse, looking at a divorce where you're the person who makes the money and your spouse isn't self-supporting, these are some issues that you'll have to consider as well. Will there be child support to that parent that they can use to live on? Will there be any contractual alimony that you'll agree to pay for a certain period of time to get your spouse to a place where she can support herself? If you go to court, would your spouse qualify for post-divorce maintenance? All of these issues are tied to the property division and what your spouse will receive in the property division. So I think the most important thing to remember is don't reach agreements on these issues one at a time, because the financial picture is all related. And it's really a good idea to look at the whole picture financially before you start reaching agreements.